Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Veronika Sonsev, co-founder of CommerceNext, a community and conference for marketers at retail and D2C brands. On behalf of my co-founders, Scott Silverman and Alan Dick, I'd like to welcome you to the 5th CommerceNext webinar. The topic for today is Cautious Optimism, Data and Perspectives on E-commerce after COVID. Today, we'll be reviewing the results of the third COVID-19 e-commerce survey, showing cautious optimism among e-commerce execs, followed by a panel discussion on business continuity and life after COVID. We'll also be taking your questions, so feel free to load them up during the presentations. Thank you all for tuning in and for making time to join us live or to listen to the replay. We hope all of you are continuing to stay healthy and safe. I want to start with a few important thank yous. First, I want to thank today's speakers, Sucharita Kodali, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, Brianna Burwell, Vice President of Finance at Bill.com, Rebecca Traverzo, VP of Marketing at ThirdLove, Bennett, Vice President of Operations and Corporate Development at Signifyd. We recognize how busy all of you are, and I want to thank you for taking the time to share your insights with our community. We're excited to partner with Signifyd for today's webinar. While the coronavirus doesn't discriminate, we've definitely seen some industry categories do better than others during this pandemic. To help our community understand the sales impact of COVID-19 across different industry categories, CommerceNext partnered with Signifyd, who's been analyzing transactional and behavioral data across over 10,000 merchants in 100 countries. We think this data is valuable for the CommerceNext community, and we're excited to have them share it with us. Now, moving on to the agenda for today's webinar. So I'm going to quickly go through some housekeeping notes, and then Sucharita will be presenting the CommerceNext survey results. After that, Bennett's going to present the Signifyd e-commerce pulse data. We're going to do some quick polls to keep you all engaged, and then we'll have the panel discussion with some Q&A. So don't worry about missing anything. We're recording this webinar, and we'll make it available for replay by tomorrow. I'm just going to show you really quickly where everything is on the screen. So first of all, if you have any questions, and feel free to load up the questions while we're going through the slides. We'll cover them during the Q&A portion, but in the meantime, we'll screen them and publish them. To ask a question, you'll see that there is a white kind of box to the right of your screen. There you'll see Q&A, polls, and handouts. To ask a question, you just click on Q&A, and then you ask the question in the bottom. Once the questions are published, the community has the ability to upvote the questions. So take a look, kind of scan through those. If any question there is consistent with what you want answered, make sure to upvote it, and we'll be prioritizing the questions that way. If you want the handout from today's webinar, the handouts are on the top. It's the third link in that white box area. We have the draft deck in there now, and we'll also have the polls in there later. If you're watching this on replay, that handout link is on the bottom of your screen. I want to thank the 100+ e-commerce executives who took the last survey. And I also want to thank again Forrester, Sucharita, Kodali, who analyzed the data and produced the findings in the slides. Our next survey is going out Monday and Tuesday of next week, April 27th and 28th. So if you find this information valuable, we would really appreciate it if you took a few minutes to answer the questions. It's what enables us to continue to share this information with our community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sucharita to walk you through the results.
Thanks, Veronika. And just for some background, this is the third of the surveys that we've done biweekly with CommerceNext. So thank you all, as Veronika said, for those of you that participated, and even for those that share a point of view with us anecdotally. This has been incredibly valuable. The good news is that things have changed, and some of the challenges that the industry experienced in the middle of March, toward the end of March, seem to be normalizing. And a lot of it also seems to be somewhat counter-cyclical with some of the stockpiling that's happened. So as grocers were experiencing tremendous growth at the end of March, we know a lot of traditional retailers did not, but that seems to be normalizing a bit as some of those traditional grocers are not quite as haven't experienced quite the same growth in April that they did in March during the stockpiling timeframe. So just a recap of this version of the survey. As we said, we've been doing it biweekly since the middle of March. The most recent version collected last week, at the beginning of last week, April 13th and 14th, with 113 total respondents. This profile was very similar to the other surveys that we also did, where there were a significant portion of apparel and accessories respondents, and we'll break those details out as relevant, and a significant portion of respondents also being either e-commerce pure plays or just traditional retailers with physical stores. The mix of revenue was varied. We had large respondents, and we also had a number of small respondents who historically have been doing pretty well. The good news from the results of this survey, at least this past week, is that e-commerce seems to be improving, and what is even better news is that it's improving also amongst apparel merchants. So that gave me heart that there was definitely a turn, and that companies are doing better than expected. So this was just a question about revenue trend. I shared with you all of the questions, all of the time frames that we had asked the question before in the blue, and the great thing is that it's a higher percent than ever that say that they're above plan, and that also applies, of course, on the right hand in the yellow to the apparel merchants, who even compared to the previous survey that we did at the end of March, were faring better. Traffic, of course, is part of that story. We've seen traffic steadily going up, and retailers across a variety of different sectors actually seeing their traffic numbers go up. And I know that our speaker from Signifyd will also talk a bit about some of that as a factor. And what's interesting is that the traffic going up is not necessarily tied to media and the media spend and the digital marketing efforts that retailers are making, because that's actually declined for half of the respondents. And you do have a small percent that say that they're increasing their media spend, a minority, I should say, but for the most part, we still have the pulling back of that marketing spend. And a number of retailers have had earnings calls in the last week and this week. The collective story there is that when retailers need to preserve their cash, one of the first things that does get cut is that advertising and marketing. So what we're seeing is retailers really driving that traffic either through their own organic efforts, often through promotions, and their owned properties like their social or their email. We're seeing forecasts also improving, and what I mean by that is companies either revising those forecasts to increase their numbers, and when we had first started to do these surveys, the thinking was that forecasts would go down substantially, and as you can see in that first tranche of data that we had collected, there was a very, very small percent of retailers that expressed any optimism, and a lot were actually on the right-hand side of this slide talking about decline. So we're seeing that gradually inch up in lockstep with all of these numbers. And one of the questions that we added to the survey this week, and this came from a lot of internal debate because we did see companies saying that their numbers and their revenue trends were ahead of plan. And our question was, well, what are these people doing that is allowing them to be ahead of plan, especially in those earlier weeks when the numbers were more questionable? Did they just lower their plan? Like, what were the factors? And I thought that this slide really does a good job of capturing some of the things that we're seeing happening. Some of those retailers are just simply able to capture some of that store traffic because their stores are closed. They've been able to capture some of that online. I'll share with you in a subsequent slide what that number was. A number of them are aggressively using their owned marketing marketing properties. So remember that half of them have decreased their digital marketing spend. A minority are increasing their marketing spend, and they're doing that as a way to conquest. But for the most part, it is that email marketing and social marketing that is often just posts on the key social networks. In some cases, the category itself just happens to drive a lot of demand. This is an example of one of the SKUs, actually, that one of the respondents actually pointed out as an example of the type of product that they're seeing a lot of energy with. And in some cases, you're, of course, seeing those deep promotions that we're getting lots and lots of emails about. And only 13% actually said they lowered their plan. So I was encouraged to see that there were these efforts that were actually happening. Now, while only 13% said that they explicitly have deep promotions, I'll nonetheless point out that the amount of promotional activity and is much, much higher even than last year. This is data actually from Edited on just how they have seen in some of the apparel merchants that they're following, that average percent discount is not, the average product discount is not that different from 2019, but the big difference in March, which tends to be not that promotional of a month, is much, much more promotional in 2020, and that's the delta and the bottom between the orange and the blue. And there was also data that you're free to peruse when you get the slides on just other average levels of discounts, even in other categories, and that data was from Retail Me Not. The transition from from stores to web continues to happen. It is a healthy double-digit percent of transactions. We know that 47% of retailers said that they are seeing that shift from stores to online. It appears that it peaked toward the end of March, but it's still going strong. And you should expect to see some of the reports of this actually being manifested in some of the earnings calls that will be happening in the next week or two. Best Buy had already announced that its March numbers were able to preserve 70% of the value of what they saw in 2019. Naturally, their stores were for the most part closed. They were doing curbside pickup, but the e-commerce division is able to pick up some of that. Of course, not 100%, but a non-trivial percent is what you're ultimately seeing. One of the questions that has also been an issue for a lot of retailers, and one of the questions that that the audience asked at the last webinar, was related to inventory and the excess inventory that supposedly is pretty rampant now. And what we asked was, what are people doing with all of that excess inventory? The good news is that half of the respondents overall said that they did not have excess inventory, but to the degree that they have it, they're either running promotions or they're trying to do some omni-channel efforts like shipping those items from physical stores or pushing curbside pickup. And a relatively small percent of respondents here said that they're sending to overstock channels now, and partly that could be that even the overstock businesses at this moment are entirely closed and probably won't be writing checks for that merchandise until a few months from now. But other things that companies said that they were doing is that they were just straight up canceling orders, carrying things forward, saving merchandise for another season. So it's a variety of different things that retailers are doing. The bad news here is that business interruptions are common. So 85% of respondents, of apparel respondents, and 81% of the overall respondents said that they've experienced some type of business interruption, either a fulfillment delay or some type of temporary warehouse closure. Also interesting to note is that the creative production process has also been challenged. And in other bad news, we know that there's been a reduction in workforce amongst a number of the respondents, salary reductions, and a very, very small percent that are actually hiring more or increasing salaries or hourly wages. And often that tends to be for those that are essential retailers that still need to maintain their businesses and need to attract work. For the most part, the other interesting point is that retailers, for the most part, have been relatively satisfied with their continuity plans. I think that there's a lot of pride that companies have in how well they've been able to transition to closing their stores and still being able to maintain their e-commerce businesses. In some cases, you've seen stores being transitioned to essentially e-commerce fulfillment centers, and the smoothness with which that's happened, I think, has led a lot of I think digital executives to feel good about what they've done here. And the optimism is strong. We are, I think, feeling better than we did earlier when we started these surveys just a few weeks ago. We have, but it's cautious optimism. So you'll see on the left-hand side, either significantly higher or slightly higher. The slightly higher is a good double-digit %. Not too many that say that their sense of optimism is significantly higher, but it's good that the slightly higher is better than those whose sentiment is lower. And the big question is really what will happen, I think, at this point in Q4. And with respect to Q4, there are concerns. Certainly consumer confidence with respect to whether or not people are even going to be buying, whether or not social distancing will continue to be in place. I think a lot of the government theses and a lot of the government estimates are that it shouldn't go that far into October, November, December, although one never completely knows. And then the other issues related to kind of business continuity, having enough inventory, or whether they'll even be able to hold on. I was somewhat concerned by that. It was good that the numbers weren't really high, but the number of apparel merchants that did express concern was a little disconcerting. As we know, apparel has been one of the most challenged sectors in all of this.
All right, Bennett, over to you.
Yeah, the suspense is too great. I'll try to do what I can. So thanks, Sucharita. That was very insightful, and it's eerie how well all of that data matches what I'm seeing. So for some context, as Veronika mentioned, Signifyd has about 10,000 merchants where we see data that will range from mom and pop shops that open a new storefront on Shopify or BigCommerce up to the largest retailer in the world and the largest non-Amazon marketplaces. So I wanted to really kind of echo a lot of what Sucharita said said some differently, and then talk about why we believe a lot of the growth that's been experienced by online retailers will accelerate the growth that we had been expecting to see, later into the 2020s. And so if we take a look at one of the most common stats talked about is the year-on-year growth for online retail. And so we're going to focus today on physical shipped goods. This is the category that Statista uses. And so if you see, we were expected to do about a 15% year-over-year growth from 2019 to 2020 in the US market. And so most of the data that we're talking about is going to focus on this B2C channel. So sold physical goods via digital channel that is delivered to an end user. And so what we've seen is just astounding growth. And we have just gotten the data for the week of 4/13, and it is above 150% from that. And in general, the growth of physical shipped goods is across the board higher, and in most sectors we're experiencing this. Some of the sectors that have experienced a pullback in the middle of March have since rebounded, and we'll talk about a couple of those, but many have just seen strong growth overall. And in general, the types of information that we'd want to talk about since the week of mid-February, late February, luxury goods makes sense that it would be down. Fashion, apparel, and luggage, of course, makes sense that it would be down. And we'll talk about high-end fashion a little bit later on, or high-end apparel as an example. And of course, supplies that are going directly to small businesses, right? Folks that are not being sold to the home consumer are suffering. But in general, almost every other sector that is a physical shipped good is up since mid-February. And that is cutting across not only sectors, but also the segments. And so if you're a small business on Shopify, you may have seen some of the information about Shopify's latest announcements. They are seeing incredible growth in their customers. BigCommerce is as well, the Magento platform. Lots of people are selling online for the first time. And we have a tale of two sides, the winners and losers in this space. Many people are going out of business, and many businesses are 500% growth in the small segments. Wayfair, I think, has been out there. Nike, a few other very large companies that are very well established. Obviously, tens, hundreds of billions in terms of sales, and they're doing quite well in terms of growth as well. So we're seeing this general rising tide, and of course, as Sucharita mentioned, it's not offsetting the loss of physical store sales, but it is definitely general and broad. So what this means is if we take the Statista 2020 expected projection of growth of 15%, Signifyd had already observed within its commerce network about 20% growth in January and February, and that growth has just unbelievably accelerated in March. And of course, April is only partial, but I just checked the data this morning. Signifyd has seen as much GMV in April as of the 21st as we had seen in March, all of March. And so the growth is just staggering. And the theory that we have is that this growth, of course, is not going to be sustained. You're not going to be permanently 36 months ahead of schedule. But what we do expect is that these new users will return to channel. And so what that looks like is that this is a graph that shows the number of new users that have never bought on an online channel before within the Signifyd network. And so we see a huge spike here in the Black Friday, Cyber Monday time period, which makes perfect sense. And then we have seen a steady increase to double to almost triple the normal amount of new users buying online. And unlike the Black Friday to Cyber Monday week, this growth is sustained. And more importantly, these new users, the red line, are converting into repeat purchasers within that first month of buying at similar rates. And so we typically see about 50% of these cohorts mature into repeat purchasers within the first month. This, of course, makes sense. There's things that need to be bought that have to be bought online because the physical stores are closed. But I think it's very interesting that we are the highest level of new users shopping online that we've ever seen before, outside of 2019's holiday period. And again, more importantly, it's sustained. So the next thing that really gives me a whole lot of hope that this type of trend is sustained is that here, the way that we think about the data in terms of user adoption, March of 2019 users and March of 2020 users are much more likely to buy multiple times in a week. And so this makes a lot of sense, right? The first time that you buy online, it's a big deal. You've never gotten your credit card out. You put it in, and then you have to wait for it to arrive. You have a good experience, and then you get more confidence. By the time that you have bought online for a year or more, you're much more likely to say, oh, well, I'll get this shirt on Monday. I'll get these groceries delivered on Thursday. I'll order something and it will, arrive 2 weeks from now, but that's fine. I'm okay with that. You have adopted that type of buying behavior. And so we believe, based on the way that we've been monitoring this data for a while, that the acceleration of that behavior will change the way that consumers spend. Not everybody will return to channel. Some people will have bad experiences, of course. But if the historical models of 50% adoption to that, and then the increase of the carts and the relative purchase amount, share of wallet is naturally going to shift to online. And so that's the two main pillars of why we believe that the CAGR acceleration will hold, and that we will end up somewhere between a year and 2 years ahead of schedule based on the Statista models in terms of online sales. So that basically means that all of our previous CAGR projections are wrong. And so this is data that from Statista and Signifyd that we had built in late 2019 to project worldwide expansion and different sector expansion. All of these are now wrong, and we're in the middle of trying to update these and better understand what's happening. the takeaways that I want to add are, physical goods and digital media are through the roof. Services are down about 50%, except for deliveries. And of course, you've probably seen the doomsday scenarios related to travel with, 80+% year-over-year declines for Q1, and Q2 is looking, of course, as bad or worse. So I think it's interesting to think about how much we don't know now. And I think a lot of that uncertainty leads to a lot of this cautious optimism. We don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what trends are going to sustain, but we can at least, say we're not where we thought we were going to be. The next thing that I want to add of, who's winning and who's losing in this space, the things that I want to kind of go through, points 1, 2, and 3 are apparel obviously already had the biggest share of online spend. It was the most mature of the verticals that was selling online. And health and beauty and food and drug were one of the lowest adopted. And so by nature, those sectors those verticals had the greatest growth potential to experience. And so they were expected to already have higher CAGRs in terms of their growth. The last one is, Sucharita mentioned, hey, Best Buy was able to do curbside pickup. Several other merchants have been able to utilize their physical space as fulfillment centers. That is only because they already had those initiatives up and running. And so I think that from that perspective, this is going to separate those that quote unquote win during this time period from those who don't. That's why you see a lot of folks talking about consolidation of the largest retailers and the success of retailers that were exclusively focused on the direct to consumer channels already. Those are the ones that are succeeding the most. And so I think that it's also really interesting that the growth in food and drug, housewares and health is about 4 years ahead, and other sectors are on target or slightly ahead of target. And so while everybody is up, people are growing differently, which of course makes sense. And I think that, as Sucharita mentioned, the essential merchants, the ones that have been able to designate their facilities as essential, that is what has driven success as well. Are you able to pick, pack, and ship those items? Are you relying on Amazon for that distribution center or not? Are you able to make sure that your supply chain is strong and in your own control? And so all of these it's really back to the basics. In my opinion, of how to succeed in e-commerce, are you doing the fundamentals of blocking and tackling, getting your goods in a way that is reliable? That is really top of mind for most of the retailers who I'm speaking with. We have Rebecca and Brianna on, and so I'll talk a little bit about some verticals that are most relevant to their sectors. We have for every single vertical, we have by product SKU. But I, for the sake of focus conversation today, we're going to talk about, Build.com's verticals and ThirdLove's verticals. So if we take a look at furniture and home decor, the story is just incredible, almost 100% growth since late February. And what we've seen are, several of these industries have seen sustained growth throughout March and into April. And we just don't see a peak yet in terms of this, unless and until the shelter-in-place orders are removed. And I think in general, for furniture and home decor and home improvement, promotions haven't been required to get that kind of traffic. If you think about it, the Home Depots and Lowe's of the world are shut down. So home improvement appliances is even stronger. So, in the broader context, we saw people do stockpiling behavior, babies, food, groceries, health items. Then they shifted to taking care of pets. And then now they've shifted to taking care of their homes. And all of a sudden that project that, someone was putting off for 6 months, they are like, I'm at home, I have the time, I'm going to get the things that I need in order to be able to get that done. Or, I'm tired of looking at that painting, I'm going to put something up new. And so, the refrigerator is all of a sudden very, very important. So let's get a new one. And people are very much going through that. And Brianna can talk a little bit about some of the alternatives to toilet paper that people are, of course, doing. So e-commerce is, again, while in general up, some of them, especially apparel, fashion, footwear, and beauty and cosmetics, have had more difficulties, I would say, or different difficulties rather. And so what we've seen is a type of pattern where there was a pullback and then a very strong resurgence in sales for fashion. And so this graph shows that fashion, again, is one of the largest categories that we see. We see about 100 million or more in GMV a week through our systems and in our commerce network. And so this fashion cart size of less than $250 is the largest of those segments for fashion. And so what you see is a precipitous drop until the middle of March, where consumers just weren't sure what was going on. Shelter-in-place orders were being rolled out. People were not thinking about buying a new shirt. And then all of a sudden, starting into April, people are at home. They need to, they still want to buy. We've seen a big increase in distraction shopping, people buying, relatively low price items because they can. And in general, a lot of the problems that we saw with demand in March were also due to the inability to fulfill. And so many retailers had their stores shutting down. They were going through operational headaches of reallocating their teams if they could, or furloughing or terminating in the worst case scenarios. And then now folks have been able to refocus those efforts to delivering online. They've gotten their fulfillment centers deemed to be essential. They've got the safety requirements set up to where their employees can work safely in those centers, and the demand has returned. That said, as Sucharita's analysis showed, we often see many promotions driving this increased demand. And it's unclear how much that promotional activity will need to be maintained. I do want to bring up fashion for cart sizes 250 to 500. And what we see here is this is a much smaller segment, first off. And secondly, what we see is the massive swings here are due to either big promotions or new product launches. And so what we've seen is that new product launches, when handled with marketing care and driving to existing customers, are experiencing excellent success. And so that seems to be a kind of winning opportunity. You see plenty of folks that are launching new shoe lines, new product lines, and those are finding a lot of success as consumers are excited about those new opportunities. I haven't included the slide about fashion greater than $500 because it's not a pretty picture. Consumer confidence has not yet returned. High-end fashion is not doing as well. So I think those are the things that I wanted to talk about. So Veronika, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bennett. I'm going to kick off the polls. And actually, Bennett, while I do that, there's two questions that have been published towards the bottom that are very specific to your slide. So maybe you can take a minute to ask those questions. So the first poll that I'm opening is, when do you think your stores will reopen? Option A is open now, B, May 1st, mid-May, then June 1st, later, may not reopen. So if all of you can jump in, I just want to remind you that you just go to the poll section, you'll see the open poll. Actually, I think the open poll pops up on your screen. But if you want to see the results, go to the closed polls once they're finalized, and you'll be able to see the results of the poll.
Right.
Just give it one more second while these are coming in.
Great. So the question about the prior forecasts, and that's correct, yes. So we don't have yet updated forecasts by vertical, for example, for digital goods or travel based on those. Those were 5-year assumptions with lots of math behind them, and basically every single lever in those assumptions is now in question. So I'm in the middle of working with my teams to update those. And there's another question about digital media being media consumption, not spend. And no, that was meant to be the spend on digital goods. So, for example, in-game spend, music, and those types of things.
Thank you, Bennett. I'm going to close this poll. Interestingly enough, it seems like most folks are assuming that stores open June 1st or later. So Very interesting. The next question is, do you feel stores are opening up too soon? And I guess maybe the way to frame this question, just because I'm posting it up here, is, you're seeing some announcements with the economy opening up in mid-May in some states, and some states it's opening up now. And the question is, do you feel like it's too early? Giving another few seconds for folks to answer. Wow, really interesting results. So I'm going to close this. It seems like the majority of folks feel like we're opening up stores too soon. Final question, second to last question. Has your company received any government assistance? And we realize that not everyone here will know. So the question is, yes, received, applied, but haven't received, did not apply or qualify, or not sure. Waiting to see responses come in. Really interesting. I'm going to close this one. It seems like very few people in this community, about 11%, responded that they've received assistance. So either people have not received it or they're not sure if they qualify or apply. For the final question, which omni-channel strategies were accelerated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic? And you can select all that apply. Making store inventory visible. So this is knowing which stores have which products, ship from store, curbside pickup, or other. And because there's not an open field in this survey, you can use the Q&A to kind of add color to the other. We're just curious to see which of your strategies have been accelerated by the pandemic. Your omni-channel strategies, I should say. A lot of people are implementing curbside pickup. Very interesting. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this. And just as a reminder, you can see the results under closed polls. It seems like the two most popular strategies are curbside pickup and ship from store. And then just as a reminder, if you're watching this on replay, the questions will be included as part of the handout, so you can just download them on the bottom navigation. All right, we're going to move into the panel discussion. Rebecca and Brianna, bringing you into the fold here. I guess maybe to start off with, since you guys got to watch and digest a lot of really interesting data based on the CommerceNext survey data and the analysis presented by Signifyd, it does seem like there's some signs of improvement. What's your reaction to that? What are you seeing in your respective businesses? Maybe Brianna, you can go first, and then Rebecca second.
Yeah, first, I just want to say thanks for having me and inviting me into the panel. I would say cautious optimism is definitely consistent with what we are seeing and generally feeling as a company. That being said, we are a business who has seen little to no interruption in our performance. And in fact, our recent weeks are outperforming our previous forecasts due to the demand that we're seeing in the market. So we are definitely on the lucky side of that. There were a few key data points in the analysis that stood out to me and that we are experiencing at Build. We saw in the early weeks, our overperformance was heavily influenced by COVID-related categories. We saw bidets, which was what Bennett was referring to, really outperform any type of history we've had in selling that product, as well as deep freezers closely following as a product that just kind of took off and skyrocketed from a performance standpoint. We were seeing anywhere from 5 to 10x average daily sales in those categories. We actually ran into fulfillment issues with both of those categories and implemented some immediate reporting to kind of ensure that we were able to make sure, or that we were able to see other potential instances of that were coming towards us and line up in some cases what was tertiary fulfillment options or even locking in inventory, which we wouldn't traditionally do as we're mainly a dropship vendor, but for products we were able to anticipate, we would lock in inventory with one of our vendors to make sure we'd be able to meet the demand that we saw coming at us. After that kind of initial category specific response, the other things that we've seen are our traffic shifting from what is normally a balance of consumer and professional customers to a much more heavy consumer mix. And I think that makes sense given what we're hearing from our professionals and kind of what you're seeing in some of the data that jobs are being pushed out and delayed, and consumers are staying home and choosing to do some of their kind of quick fix DIYs, which is really kind of our bread and butter at Build. Just kind of quickly with that shift came some fundamental changes for our business from a profitability standpoint. Our professional customers are expensive for us to acquire initially, but they're typically extremely loyal, and they obviously have a much higher AOV than the consumer side would. So seeing our customer mix really shift to the consumers, we've had to kind of take some actions that are specifically to address the marketing costs and the efficiency that we need to maintain as a business in order to continue to drive our profitability at the rate that we would like to keep it at. So that means mainly evaluating our margin and making sure we're generating enough margin to offset that. I think it was kind of Bennett speaking to our category specifically is not needing to be super heavy on the promotional side. So coming out of March, which is actually a big month for us in terms of seasonality, we evaluated our promos for April and pulled back on some of those and some of our kind of low cost leader strategies to make sure that we were positioned from where we needed to be. So all in all, I'd say, yes, we're definitely seeing some of the trends that are in that data and are cautiously optimistic given our ability to pivot and respond to where the demand in our market is.
Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. Rebecca, I'd love to hear your feedback. And then just Sucharita, heads up, I'm going to go to you afterwards because there's some questions about discounting. And I know that Brianna and Rebecca didn't discount, so I want to direct that question kind of as an industry question to you. But Rebecca, what do you see in your business and how does it compare to the data?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So ThirdLove being an apparel brand really focused on women's intimate category, we're definitely seeing the same trends that the data represents as far as fashion and apparel kind of bouncing back this month. We've seen positive signs of improvement in our business starting in the beginning of April. And I think, consumers are getting used to our new normal and adapting their lives accordingly. And, with stimulus checks and small business loans and grants, I think consumers are feeling a lot more comfortable and confident in the economy and less concerned with a possible recession. So they're starting to spend money on things that not only do they need, but they actually want. And we're seeing that in our business today, especially as a women's intimates brand and people, working from home and not necessarily wearing bras every day. Seeing this positive and sustained trend in our business is really compelling. But we are still being very cautious in our optimism. And, to your point, we don't necessarily we don't do heavy promotions and discounts for our brand. And we've been able to maintain that level of success without having to heavily discount our products.
Awesome. I think the two of you are in fortunate categories. There was a question by Matilda who asked if you plan to continue heavy discounts. I'm going to kind of rephrase that question because I know, Rebecca, you and Brianna don't, and direct it to Sucharita. Do you think retailers will continue their heavy discounts, given kind of the optimism they're seeing? Do you think competitors will? I guess maybe it's an overall industry question. Sucharita, I'll direct that to you.
Yeah, I don't know that there is any indication that we'll be cutting back on the amount of the overall promotional activity. What's really interesting, I think, about Rebecca and Brianna is that they're in unique businesses, right? And Build.com, correct me if I'm wrong, but is primarily a marketplace, or it's a drop ship. So they don't have to own as much inventory, and the discounts are primarily coming from owned inventory players, and historically. Regarding, kind of if I can speak about the direct-to-consumer models overall, of which ThirdLove, falls into that categorization, those brands have also just historically not been as dependent on discounts. They've been, kind of fair price, everyday, same price types of retailers versus the high-low strategy that most of the rest of the retail industry employs. And that is entirely driven by the amount of inventory that you have to buy, and the fact that, kind of we saw on that one of those earlier slides that, there are a lot of concerns, especially in apparel, about excess inventory, and the number one tactic to addressing that is to mark those items down. The other reason that we'll likely see the discounts continuing is that there have been a lot of canceled orders, and when there are a lot of canceled orders, there are a lot of upstream manufacturers that now have to hold on to that inventory. What is going to happen to that? They're certainly not going to find buyers to buy a lot of that merchandise at full price, especially when it's off season. So they'll likely discount that merchandise in the months to come. So probably around summertime and going into the Q4 and fall season. So I think that it'll actually be great for consumers. Shoppers will get fantastic deals if you can afford them, if you still, have income coming in. But I don't think that we're out of the woods anytime soon. 2021, I think all eyes are on 2021 for a good year, but 2020 will be pretty grim for a lot of the retail industry.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's consistent with what we're seeing in the data, and I just want to kind of quickly make sure to kind of point out. I know some people had questions that they were asking. Just because we won't have time to answer all of them live. If you look under the published answers, and some, Indy has been answering some of the questions that were directed at Bennett with respect to the Signifyd data. So just check the feed and see if your question has already been answered. So one of the interesting things we saw in the survey is, 85% of businesses had some sort of interruptions, but only 14% of retailers or brands said they were dissatisfied by that. I guess maybe I'll direct this to Bennett. Are you surprised by that? Why do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think people are very thankful in general, right? So you see all the horrible news about everything that's happening, around the world, and I think people that are able to continue to do business are thankful for that. And so I also think that in general, a lot of people have been able to weather the storm. I think Sucharita mentioned that retailers are proud of the response, of their nimbleness, and the ability to pivot. And so I think that the combination of struggles that have been overcome, leading to a sense of pride with that, and pride for their teams that have done those things, and then a comparison of, my goodness, things could be worse, is leading to that response.
That makes a lot of sense. I think this is a crisis that has, I kind of, when we were first thinking about the session, we know that e-commerce companies have put in a lot to make sure that their sites kind of withstand scale, but this crisis has had, unprecedented and unexpected interruptions, but at the same time, it seems like there's some quick reactions that have really paid off. I want to kind of talk about some of those quick reactions because, like you mentioned, everyone assumed that e-commerce would be the hero in all of this. And for a lot of brands, it was. We saw the data, both in the CommerceNext survey data and the Signifyd data, that overall e-commerce is up in many categories. But at the same time, some brands did have to temporarily shut down stores and fulfillment. And I should say e-commerce, and because of fulfillment. And then others had to scale up fast, which caused other challenges. Sucharita, what are companies doing to adapt operations, and how is technology helping retailers adapt to this new normal?
Well, we've seen, as even the poll made clear, there's been, for retailers that have physical stores, they've had to really, really quickly turn on things like curbside pickup or ship from store. And what we're basically hearing is that what used to be maybe a roadmap of 24 months was really compressed into a few weeks. So anything that was already planned, especially as it relates to an omni-channel capability, was turned on and augmented and enhanced even more. In certain categories where retailers have found that maybe their assortment just wasn't resonating at this moment in time, especially for some of these soft goods companies, they leaned into their marketplaces or their dropship partners to try to augment that assortment to be more relevant. So, that's certainly, another approach to how these companies are using technology. There's been more of an interest in touchless transactions or any type of a payment vehicle that would not have to require, kind of somebody handing over a credit card. So there are different things that I think different retailers have tried. I think that it all falls under the rubric of digital transformation in different parts, and some of it is. But one thing I will say is that it's been a lot more about these tactical how to drive sales, and what we've seen deprioritized a lot more now, I would argue, is we haven't heard as much about, oh my gosh, what's my AI solution now? And, kind of what is AI going to do for my business? I think that this pandemic, I think, has kind of put a lot of those solutions on the back burner for the time being.
Yeah, it seems like it's not innovation for innovation's sake. It's innovation with very, very specific goals. Get products in consumers' hands as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, very, very practical. One of the things all of us are sitting at home right now. One of the things that has clearly been a big disruption for all of our lives is these work from home policies. There's two, I kind of have a two-part question on this. One is, implementing work from home has its own challenges. We have data that's protected that you now have to access from home. So I want to direct that to Bennett. And then it has the secondary challenge of we're dealing with the family consequences of it with, children now not necessarily having childcare available. So Bennett, I'll start with you, and then I'll go over to Rebecca and Brianna to talk about kind of what the companies are doing from a broader work from home perspective.
Yes. So, Signifyd is fortunate in that we are, we're a software as a service company. And so, most of our employees and contractors can work from home as long as we have the IT infrastructure set up. Our co-founder has been remote all 8 years that the company's been in existence. So we thankfully had that infrastructure built up and multi-zone and multi-time zone kind of coverage. I think that in general, VPNs were kind of a hand wave solution to everything. Oh, well, people will just, tunnel in and everything will be secure. VPNs have throttles, all the technologies have different licensing restrictions. And kind of the, as Sucharita mentioned, I think blocking and tackling is how I would put a lot of what people have been doing of the nuts and bolts. Are you doing the basics right? Do you have the things that you need? Is the equipment in the hands of the people who can use it? In general, I think that retailers have been a very mixed bag on this. Some were totally 100% ready from the get-go for whatever reason, and some were very much caught off guard. And so I think that is actually a bigger distinction in terms of how people have been able to respond to this than even industry may be, as an example.
Excellent. Thank you, Bennett. And Rebecca, I'll go to you. Maybe first start to talk about business interruptions as a whole, and then how you've your company has adjusted to work from home, from the work from home environment.
Yeah, totally. So from an operational perspective, we've ensured that all team members are kind of set up for success on working from home. So we've sent out like standing desks, monitors, keyboard, mouse, like anything anyone needs in order to be comfortable working from home and have their own private place. And then from, a day-to-day, I mean, the only constant is really daily stand-ups, first thing in the morning, super quick, 15, 20 minutes, going around the horn, and then checkouts later in the day. And then that allows for our team members to kind of create their own schedule based on their family needs, where they're not tied to necessarily be in front of their computers from 9 to 5, which is a typical day. Whether they come on at night, first thing in the morning, because just like, I have an 11-year-old son as well, where I have to do homeschooling in the morning, and I'm working from home in New York. ThirdLove is based in San Francisco. So when my team gets on, it's my afternoon, it's their morning. So we've all been very flexible and adaptable and super agile during this time to just accommodate everybody's schedule as well as any type of interruptions they may have based on their family's need.
Great. And Brianna, do you want to kind of jump in? I know you guys at Build have put together some pretty robust business continuity plans given kind of past experience. Would love for you to share some of that.
Yeah, so in 2018, we had the campfire in California, which was about 15 miles from where our headquarters is. And that was a huge interruption to our business and our workforce. And we just really learned a lot from that experience. And if I can kind of shine a light on a positive aspect of that, like whatever your company is going through right now and struggling with, it's really an opportunity to learn and to grow and put things in place that will continue to allow your business to cope during times like this, but also kind of get your teams and your people in the mindset of what's to come, even beyond that. So after the campfire, we were able to put a lot of things we needed to allow our workforce to be more remote in place, really from like a systems and a hardware perspective, so that when we had this COVID crisis come up, we were able to really easily just let all of our employees be at home. Most were already on the laptop system. We are still utilizing a VPN network like Bennett was talking about, but we were already working on and will continue to move towards having all of our corporate applications online with different requirements, just knowing that we're kind of teetering on the edge of being too big for that solution that we have today. So we definitely have taken the learnings that we had from that previous experience, and it allowed us to be more successful from a continuity standpoint during this crisis. In terms of just like the other policies around working from home, we found that the most successful way to navigate that has been to ask the employees first. It not only shows the employee that you care and that you're invested in figuring out something that works for them, but also just kind of builds loyalty and retention with that employee. They feel it on the other end that you're willing to work with them, and they just are really appreciative of that. It may be as simple as flexibility in hours, like Rebecca was mentioning. It may also look like some people need or want to volunteer for what would typically be an undesirable or unfavorable shift, like graveyard or working on the weekends, but maybe they're trying to manage a spouse that's working during the week. And so giving them the opportunity to volunteer for that, and somebody who's on that shift to get off of that shift in the interim is just another option that another outcome that we've seen happen that helps it just work for everyone. For me, that means just checking in a little bit more in off hours. I have employees now that are working like all shifts that you can imagine. So typically where I would try to disconnect and be home, because I have 2 kids under 5 years old at my household. So I would typically try to be a bit more disconnected and spend time with them, but just checking in more, making sure that they have what they need to be successful at whatever time it is that they're putting in their hours in their work.
Awesome. Thank you, Brianna. I'm going to let us run over just by a few minutes because there's a lot of questions and I want to give people a chance to get them answered. Damon Levy has a question that I'm going to direct to Sucharita, which is what's happening with subscription fashion. Sucharita, do you have any insights on that one?
So I think the subscription fashion companies haven't formally released data, but in general, what we're seeing is that subscriptions at this point in time are not faring particularly well. You may have seen AT&T had an earnings announcement today, and they missed earnings, even though they are a mobile device company. And you would think that more people would be on their mobile devices than ever before, and they are. But a significant part of the earnings miss was related to the TV and the cable and the landline part of their business completely falling off. So anything that's optional gets killed in a market environment like this, and a large part of that is just purely tied to economic circumstances. We have record high unemployment. We'll continue to see record high unemployment, and when you have optional expenses, those are the first things that get cut.
Totally makes sense. I guess the other question Liz Zielinski had are there changes in product return rates? So I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but I guess are people returning products less frequently now, or also are you changing your return policies potentially to address the fact that people may not be readily able to go to the post office or to UPS to actually process their returns? Rebecca, could you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, we're not seeing any increase in returns. Actually, we're seeing a decrease in returns. And we haven't changed our return policy. So we have a 60-day wash it, wear it, fit guarantee promise. And we've seen actually return rates decline. But we've opened up a partnership with Returnly for customers to be able to return packages at local establishments like their local CVS or Walgreens, etc. But again, we've been able to maintain, if not decrease, our return rate to date since COVID.
And this
Awesome.
is something this is something that Signifyd tracks, and we see returns down pretty substantially across the board, about 25% down actually.
Bennett, do you think that that's just because people can't get to the post office or UPS, or do you just think that they're buying what they need? Okay. So you think that'll pick up once people can get...
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's lack of access to actually process the return. I think that new users actually have lower return rates. And so overall, and because we have so many new users flooding the system, they're not comfortable yet with aggressive returning behavior that we see from people that are comfortable online. So I don't think that is sustainable, but at least in the short term, we see it down.
Got it. I'm going to ask one final question, and then we'll try to cover the questions that were unanswered separately. But with all the changes that we made to accelerate e-commerce under COVID-19, what do you think is going to stick? I mean, obviously e-commerce adoption, but anything else that you're seeing that you think in terms of consumer behavior that you think will stick post-COVID or in the COVID-19 recovery period? Bennett, I'll start with you. And this question is for everybody. Just go across.
Yes. Goodness. My first answer would be new users. I think cross-border has surprised me as well. It's performing surprisingly well for us. We would think, or at least my bias would have been, new users would be more interested in buying, domestically, at least at first with their first purchase. What we're seeing in the US, Canada, Australia, all the European countries, and APAC, all of them have seen increases in cross-border adoption as well, which is surprising to me, but I think is something that will continue and accelerate. I think people will become much more used to buying online, period, and then venturing abroad to find that first purchase or a repeat purchase.
Rebecca, what do you think? Are you on mute? I'm going to skip Rebecca and go to Sucharita. Any final thoughts on what you think will stick?
I think that the single biggest change has been how rapidly retailers are moving and how rapidly they're realizing they can move, and how much often, just a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy got in the way of decisions. So I hope that actually ends up being one of the great byproducts, is just speed. This is going to be huge for, catching up after being put on pause for so long.
Great. Brianna, what do you think?
I absolutely would echo what Sucharita said. And then I think really just the need for balance in the omni-channel experiences. And like our parent company is predominantly brick and mortar, and understanding now that we don't have the luxury in these situations to take 3 years to implement an omni-channel strategy. We need to be doing it now, and it needs to be done in a month or a week or something like that. So I think the omni experiences will definitely stick around, and that consumers will continue to drive it on both channels.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for staying on. I know we went a little over. Thank you for staying on and answering questions. Thank you to the participants who stayed on to the very end. We hope everyone has a great day and you continue to stay safe and healthy. Take care, everyone.